Hey, so hello and welcome to another episode of Lab Automation 101. Um, a few weeks ago, I asked for your input on who we should have on the show, and a name that kept popping up was Keltoum Boukra from the London Biofoundry. And I was very lucky actually to meet her at SLAS in San Diego, and I managed to persuade her to come onto the show. So Keltoum, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to participate in your show.
Well, I'm glad I managed to convince you to come on also, so that's good. You came very highly recommended, so there's no pressure on you whatsoever.
Yeah, no pressure.
No problem. So maybe just to get us going, Keltoum, if you just want to walk us through a little bit about who you are, I guess your journey in automation, and maybe some information about what the London Biofoundry does as well.
Yeah, sure. So my background is in robotics engineering, and I first met with synthetic biology and lab automation when I joined my previous company called Lab Genius in London. And I stayed a bit over 4 years at Lab Genius doing lab automation, and then I joined the London Biofoundry pretty recently, actually, so last year. So the London Biofoundry, based in London in the UK, it's a lab that is part of Imperial College of London on one side, but it's also part of Symbicity. So Symbicity is, for those who don't know, UK's National Innovation and Knowledge Centre for the adoption of synthetic biology in industry. And so in practice, what Symbicity does is it tries to help incubate new businesses by helping them with space and accelerator programs, funding, training, mentoring. It's headed by Professors Brimont and Kidney. In terms of the London Biofoundry more specifically, so there are a number of goals that we're after. I guess one very important one is to really try and innovate in the synthetic biology space. So we try to really work on innovative science. And if we were to think about the outputs here, I guess papers are the concrete outcome. But most of the work we do, if not all, is open source. So actually everyone can access the work we do, whether it is in terms of protocols and research outcomes, but also in terms of when there's code involved. Our GitHub is totally open for people to look at and get inspired. Some concrete examples of the work we do. So recently there's been a paper published by two of my colleagues called Matthew Haynes and Benedict Collin, amongst other people. And there they really try to develop a very streamlined process from software all the way to automation in the lab for basic DNA assembly. Another concrete example is when COVID hit, the London Biofoundry has actually been very, very fast at establishing an automated COVID testing platform, and they deployed this platform and multiplied this platform into hospitals in London, one of them being the Hammersmith Hospital. So I guess a recurrent theme in the research we do at the London Biofoundry is to leverage the automation equipment we have at our disposal, which is quite consequential, but also include software and develop very streamlined processes for what are usually pain points for industry. That's one goal out of maybe maybe three more. One important one is to really support innovation. So one aspect of that is to try and collaborate with suppliers. For example, we'll be the beta customer for a new product that a synthetic biology company will release. And again, in terms of outcomes here, we will work on white papers to kind of showcase the capabilities of this new product. We also support small and medium companies a lot. So in our lab, we can actually meet with people from many different companies. And the idea here is that we collaborate with these young companies to provide them with, again, space, access to equipment, access to our expertise as well, to develop their research. And this can be a huge benefit for them because when they're just starting off with their companies, they don't necessarily have the cash to spend in a lab or in equipment. And so with us, they can actually really fast track this initial phase of generating confirmation data on their idea, which yeah, can be a really huge accelerator for them. And maybe the last point in terms of what the London Biofoundry is after is also creating companies. I guess on average, we have about 2 spin-outs a year in the past few years. So there's a lot of turnover, but there's also a lot of dynamism altogether and many ideas floating around, I guess, in the London Biofoundry.
Yeah, well, sounds very, very cool, actually. And so as a robotics engineer, I mean, what do you do exactly then?
Well, I develop automation in a number of different types of projects. So I work with, as I mentioned, collaboration with suppliers. I do a little bit of that. So I work with suppliers of automations, also consumables, and also sometimes link them together with the automation. I also develop projects for people who work in our lab, so try to automate basic processes for them. Essentially, they will come to me and they will be like, look, there's this thing, it's really tedious to run, it spans over days, can you help me with that? And I try to help them. And then I come up with my own very kind of innovative types of projects. So I'm working with my colleague Livia on developing virtual reality in the context of the lab. So the idea there being that we could track experiments that we run in the lab with no effort, with glasses that we record what we do at the bench,
Wow.
but also add a add a layer of augmented reality there, where the instructions for the scientists would be layered on top of the the environment of the person who's in the lab. So I come up with these projects as well, and develop them on my side.
You make it sound all very easy. I just can't. And so forth. I think what's even more amazing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Keltoum, but you don't even have a degree in robotics engineering or anything like that. Is that correct to say?
Yeah, that's right.
Pretty amazing, to be honest. I guess most people will be thinking, well, how did she manage to do that?
Yeah, it's quite crazy because most people have PhDs and are very well trained, and I come here and I'm like, they're coming up with my ideas, working in the lab, pretending I know what I'm doing.
Well, I mean, I hope you're not just pretending. So you must be doing something right. So that's cool. So Keltoum, when I was doing some research on you, obviously I went on your LinkedIn profile and so forth, and in the about you section, most people, they have like a whole bunch of adjectives where they write about how amazing they are and what great leaders and entrepreneurs they are and whatnot. But you only have a few words, and yours is a very simple equation. From the last time I checked, at least, I don't know if you've changed it. But last I checked was tech plus biology equals healthcare. And I'm not saying that that's what defines you, but obviously it's something that you must be very passionate about if you put that as who you are. And so where does this passion for healthcare come from then?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's a very important thing. At least professionally, this is what I think about a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna get deep here, but it's quite a deep thing. So I think in the grand scheme of things, health is one of the most precious attributes we have as humans, or rather, without health, our perspectives as humans are very limited. Yeah. And many of us, we know people who got sick, or we are sick ourselves. And when the disease hits, we hope that there's a cure, or it's not always the case that there's a cure. Sometimes there is a cure, but it's not really satisfying from a lifestyle perspective. And there's this thing where often we are left with only hope that things will get better, hope that maybe a miracle will happen and this disease will disappear by itself. We will get lucky. And we end up living with a sword of Damocles hanging over our heads. But on the other hand, there's this thing where, as humans, we've been making tremendous progress on understanding biology. We can, for example, write, read, modify, create even DNA. We can program cells. We can produce proteins. And on top of that, we also made incredible progress on the tech and the logistical side, So we can use instrumentation that is really complex. We can use very sophisticated imaging systems to track cells. We can order enzymes with a click of a button. And of course, we can use lab automation to automate bench protocols.
Yeah.
On top of that as well, we've developed powerful computational tools. We developed software and hardware to really superpower people and researchers in particular. So with all this background, what I want to say is that my ambition of combining tech and biology to power up healthcare, it's really just logical in my head. There's a huge problem, unmet clinical needs, which impact everyone. And there's a huge potential, which is the advancement of technology. So my idea here is to use this, develop synergies around this two to lead to incredible positive outcomes. In terms of like concretely what it can look like during my university years, because I still went to university. I was an intern in a robotics lab that applied robotics to medicine, and their researchers were developing all sorts of devices like surgery robots. So Da Vinci robot is one of the most famous examples here. But at my previous company as well, LabGenius, I was supporting the development of a platform that iterates rapidly over a cycle to generate and test potential drug candidates with the support of ML and lab automation. So then there are many more initiatives around the world, including initiatives to increase the human longevity. So I think the challenge is not really in developing technology or biology, it's more making those two work really well together.
You know, and so, I mean, when you look at the equation itself, it looks, on paper at least, pretty simple. You know, you have two variables, although I argue whether it's two variables because it's more like two categories, because within each category, there must be multiple variables, I'm assuming. You know, and then the outcome is, you know, I guess, improved healthcare and advances and all the things that you were talking about. Is there like a specific like case or example you can give us of how you bring that particular equation to life?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that we in the lab, or I in the lab, work more with computers than pipettes or my hands is, I think, is a concrete example. I in the Biofoundry do the manual and how can I say? Yeah, I guess manual work only when it comes to like setting up, let's say, inputs for my automated experiments, or it's not the largest part of my job is really using computers, using simulators for the automation, using different software for designing experiments or for running experiments when it comes to lab automation. So I think, I mean, in practice, this is how it looks in terms of concrete examples. Yeah, the one I gave with my previous company, LabGenius, I think it's the perfect example that LabGenius is really trying to make those two work really well together, technology and biology. So it's like the cycle I was talking about is starting at the computer level, then go in the lab to test with lab automation, with a lab automation layer, and then go back into the computational side with, you know, the machine learning aspect. I think LabGenius really embodies this technology plus biology type of synergy.
Right.
And as I said, there's so many other initiatives around the world, like so many people are actually trying to do this type of work. If you think about even the manufacturers of lab equipment, if you think DNA sequencers, for example, they're also a great example of, you know, super pushed in terms of technology. And yet it's something that's, you know, used daily by any lab scientist. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, there are many applications to that in real life that touch everyone who does some sort of, you know, science in the lab.
Yeah. And so I take it, I think it's a bit obvious to state that, you know, you're a big believer, obviously, in technology, that it can help drive innovation in the lab. And maybe in particular, I'm talking about the lab automation aspect from the technology part of your equation. So, you know, what would you say then to the labs that actually think that, you know, you don't need to have technology to drive innovation in the lab? And then there might even be some that might think, you know what, actually it's almost like a hindrance to advancements. You know, what do you have to say to those labs?
No, I mean, I don't want to say, oh, they're wrong and, they didn't get it. I don't want to say that, because it is true that there is a cost to implementing all this technology, whether it's money, whether it's time. Some of them are also early technologies, so that means they're not that reliable yet. So there is an element of it can actually slow down some things. But the way I see technology in the lab is more as an investment. I think investing in this type of thinking or mindset or equipment, I think is going to be hopefully a huge enabler down the line for those people. It's just that it's like if you were to use or let's say you use Windows in your day-to-day, but one day you go to Mac, like it's going to take some time for you to get used to Mac, and at first you're going to be like, nah, this is crap, I need to go back to Windows, right? Like it's just, but when you get to use it more and more, you understand, its capabilities, and now you become more efficient. Although at the beginning you were actually slower. That's I guess my main takeaway on this.
So I guess it's just a case of it's like adapting to the change. And, not everybody likes change, in fairness. I think I've mentioned several times that, we're typically creatures of habit. We like doing, we don't like to change too much because, it just works for us and we're comfortable in that respect. So that's a good point. So, there's been a lot of talk lately also about Chat GPT. Recently, the efficacy of it, the ethics of it, and so on and so forth. And I'm just curious from your perspective, actually I'm curious to know if the London Biofoundry actually uses something like Chat GPT or plans to use it, and if so, how? And if you think, oh God, no, we're not going to use it, why not, to be honest?
No, that's a really good question. At the London Biofoundry, there's not one initiative that is to try and implement Chat GPT in any of our work. Not yet anyway. But there is in the same building where the London Biofoundry is, there's a new initiative called Imperial X, which is all about leveraging artificial intelligence in the context of different areas, including biology. So there's going to be a lot of collaboration between different labs and Imperial X. So that's going to be interesting, and we are very likely going to get involved in some of those. So maybe we'll have to do a follow-up on that one in terms of the London Biofoundry. But in terms of Chat GPT itself, I guess the other day I was chatting with someone about it, and I think we both agreed to say that Chat GPT can be seen like the next Google. That like Google at its beginning, Chat GPT is a revolution, really, that opens up so many opportunities, like a whole new world of things that we didn't see before. Like Google, Chat GPT is accessible to pretty much anyone as well. And like Google, Chat GPT introduces, as you said, a number of ethical questions. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it evolves in the future, and how people are going to actually use Chat GPT, because that's a big unknown in the equation. Are people going to make good use of it, bad use of it? What do we define as good and bad for this? In my personal day-to-day, I use Chat GPT, I think daily. I think now it's like my Google as well. I open Google every day, Chat GPT as well. Sometimes for me, it just speeds things up. Like if I need to write let's say a long paragraph or something, I just put some bullet points and it will write a nice text for me. Especially considering I'm not an English, native, it helps me quite a lot. But that's not like every day. I think the everyday thing for me is like trying to test it and push it and see how it performs, and be like, aha, you didn't do well here. Okay. Find its limits, So I can give you an example here. The other day I was putting together a very small tool to calculate what volumes of samples at different concentrations I should mix together in a single tube in order to get a equimolar pool in the end. So it's like a mathematical type of problem, because there are some constraints, like I don't have infinite amount of samples, I can't make a huge pool in terms of volume and so on. So I put it together, that tool, and then I asked ChatGPT, okay, do the same. And so we were in that discussion where I was telling it, oh no, but how would you deal with this edge case and this edge case, because it's all about edge cases in that question as well. Yeah. So yeah, I often end up in this situation, and I end up with like a lame answer, like "you dumb" or "yeah, thank you." It always deviates from like a very serious discussion somehow to something dumb. Like I don't know why, but anyway.
That's interesting. Wow. So Keltoum, when you think about your I guess your role and what you do and so forth, like what would you say is like your biggest challenge that you have in your role?
I think it's always so my personal level obsession is always productivity. So I always think about, okay, how can I be more efficient when I do something? And right now, when I look at the work I do and the number of hours I spend doing a task, I'm not happy with. And in the context of lab automation, I feel like there's still maybe too much time I'm spending optimizing a script for lab automation before it actually does the job. So I don't have like a decade of experience in lab automation. So there's definitely an element of I'm not maybe enough experienced to be faster. But there's still like an element of maybe sometimes the software we use are a bit behind, and like there's still optimization to do there. So I think the biggest challenge to answer your question is trying to make better use of my time to accelerate the development of these projects I am working on that then lead to innovation, as I was saying earlier. So yeah, that's I think the one that comes to mind instantly.
Cool. So I've got one final question. See, I told you it goes pretty quick. So it's about the lab of the future. So I mean, I would think you've probably been in labs. Obviously been in labs. And if you think about labs from 5 years ago, they look very different from what they look like today. 5 years from now, I'm sure they'll look very different. So if you were just to look forward, thinking about the work that you do and how you help support innovation and all these new and upcoming, very innovative companies that are coming to you for help on that front, what does the lab of the future look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And I think I'm not going to be I don't have, as I was saying, I don't have like years and years and years of experience. So I think what I say, needs to be measured against that. But I think my hope, generally speaking, in terms of lab of the future, my hope and what I think the lab of the future should look like at the high level is less waste altogether, less time spent in repeating experiments, less time spent in troubleshooting experiments, shortening the feedback loops. All these are, I mean, they're quite abstract, but I think if you're in the lab, you've seen that. You've seen troubleshooting experiments lasting for weeks and sometimes even months, not understanding why cells are behaving in a certain way, why outcomes of an experiment are not reproducible. And this is a huge waste. And if we try to think about bring the human into this, less time spent performing repetitive work, underutilizing the human brain and all this knowledge accumulated over years by lab workers. I think this is what I hope lab of the future would look like. But in terms of, this is high level, as I said, but in terms of concretely how we could look like, I can see several angles. One of them is more modern software for labs. So I'm thinking share ELNs, LIMS as well, obviously, and lab automation software. Another angle is more performance lab experiment recording and data tracking. As I was saying, I was working on this augmented reality project with the hope that we can track better data in the lab, with the hope that we can follow better protocols in the lab, because I think there's still a lot of work to do on that front. And maybe another angle to this is seamless integration between software and wet lab, ending up in a world where we can design experiments and run them without committing any type of errors in the lab, being able to rely on our results, being able to reproduce experiments and results. So having this sort of very streamline the integration between this software and wet lab is what I hope lab of the future is going to look like. And when I zoom in even more in terms of lab automation specifically, what I would really like is more learning content in general that will help, leading to more talent, starting straight from university, training students in lab automation, really spreading the use of lab automation, make automation be the norm in labs rather than, the niche and oh, wow, they have lab automation as well. Damn, that's too much, that's too much the case now, I think. So if you think like an analogy here, nowadays we all have smartphones, right? And it's like the norm, but it was not the case 20 years ago. So I would like to be in the situation down the line in the future, in the lab of the future, where lab automation and these types of tools in general anyway, are the norm more than the exception.
Yeah, so I lied. It wasn't my last question then, because just building on that, when you talk about making lab automation the norm, I mean, if you were now, like you're sitting here now, you're going to be talking to a whole bunch of labs, let's say, who do manual processes, what would you tell them about why you would advise that maybe they don't automate their entire process, the complete lab, from end to end, but at least some workflows, why they should be automated?
So unfortunately, I think in lab automation, the devil is always in the details. So I think, as you said, it's not the case that you're going to go somewhere in the lab and you're going to look at the process and you're going to automate everything, because sometimes it just doesn't make sense. I think though the value that automation can bring is multi-angled. Obviously, there's time saving. There's the fact that you do not have to be there necessarily. So if you think about a continuous growth types of experiment, you would like to be able to run those over the weekend as well, but sometimes, well, you can't because you usually don't work over the weekend. So you can generate data 24/7 with lab automation, which you can hardly do in a normal setting. So that's one concrete benefit. There's a huge angle that is the error-prone processes that are not error-prone anymore when they are automated, or at least 90% of the time. So if you think about cherry picking from a 384 well plate into another 384 well plate, this is hugely error-prone to do by hand. It's nearly impossible, in fact. All these processes that are very tedious to run by hand. I'm thinking, for example, ELISA assays. I actually talked to someone recently who injured seriously their thumb because they ran so many of these ELISAs. And this is something not to neglect. Like, we need to develop our colleagues and employees. We need to support them in using their brains rather than pipetting all day long and then hurting themselves. And then maybe a more abstract point, but something that I care about a lot, is again data tracking. So with automation in your lab, hopefully you can also track better what you do. That comes together with a whole different mindset as well, and with another layer of maybe software or tools or whatever it would look like. But automation helps tracking better, which means when you get the results of your experiments and you don't really understand why you're getting those, you can look back and with no question, with no ambiguity, you know exactly what happened and you know what should be taken out of the equation. Because something that we end up doing a lot in a standard lab is looking back and trying to remember, oh, did I do this way or this way? And this just adds another layer of complexity on top of biology that's already complex. So I hope the answer is clear. I hope I convinced some people, maybe. But yeah, this is what I would say.
No, I think you did. And Keltoum, I just want to say thank you very much for your time today. It's been absolutely great to chat with you. I think what you're doing, I think one, I just think it's very cool. But two, I also think it's very admirable as well. Especially the fact that you're supporting, the small to medium-sized businesses who are just starting up and maybe don't have access, like you said, to certain particular resources. I always feel like these are probably like the most innovative companies, and it's good that you're giving them I think that the support that they need, actually. So I just want to say thanks to you on that front, and it was, like I said, very lovely to chat with you as well.
Thank you very much, Alex. It was a pleasure.